I would like to share with you some reflections about how we can grow in awareness of our own falsity, so that always for the purpose of growing in our relationship with God and coming into our true self. And you know, as adults, we have a choice. We can either become more and more embedded in our falsity and just kind of dig our heels in and say, well, this is the way I am. I'm too old to change, or whatever excuse we may give. Or we can begin to wake up. I remember a woman who came for spiritual direction, and she was in her mid-70s. And she said to me, after she shared with me her journey and what she was struggling with, and spent some time with her, and at one point she said to me, she said, why did it take me till I was 75? And I think we all have that feeling, don't we? It's like, why does it take us so long? Well, first of all, our emotional programs for happiness are so deeply embedded in us because they begin when we're children, and we don't have self-consciousness at that time. We can't stand back and try to figure it out or come to a better way to respond. And so it takes us a while. And then after we come into early adulthood, we're building our ego, we're getting to know ourselves. It's all part of the human development. But at some point, we have to make the choice. Am I going to continue to rest and be immersed in my falsity even though I'm in a rut and I'm not happy with it? Or are we going to begin to wake up and notice our reactions to life? That's one of the ways that we really can become aware of our falsity and our truth, is to notice our reactions to life and notice our dis-ease within. What makes us uncomfortable? What do we worry about? What do we get fixated on? And slowly then we can pray for the openness to change and to respond to God's grace. But remember, and I mentioned this earlier, our conscious resolution to change our values and our behavior is not enough. Our conscious resolution isn't enough because to alter those unconscious value systems. Only God can dismantle our falsity. Only God, with our openness. God's not going to force truth upon us. We need to be open, but only God can dismantle our falsity. Anthony de Mello was a Jesuit priest from India who, before his untimely death, just was doing tremendous work in the spiritual journey. And one of the things he says, in fact, he has a book by this title. He said, it's all about awareness, awareness, awareness. And I was thinking of that as I was preparing this conference, and I thought, yes, it's about becoming aware, growing in awareness. And it's like, as our image of God begins to unfold, and we can experience ourselves as being loved unconditionally by God, we can afford to be aware, because that's what takes away our fear. And it was Thomas Merton who described God as mercy within mercy within mercy. The two kind of go together, don't they? Awareness and mercy. And it's the dance between the two, the relationship between the two, that brings us into truth. And so, as it indicates in Scripture, the desire, again from Romans, the desire to do right is there, but not the power. We need to depend on God's loving mercy. And so, let's look then at some of the things we really need to attend to. First of all, as I mentioned earlier, when we begin to get in touch with our falsity, it's discouraging. It's like, oof. And I always thought everybody else had problems, but not me. Or I thought that person was, if I looked at that person and saw how many struggles they had, then I thought I was pretty good, you know, that comparison thing. And so it's like, we tend to get discouraged, but remember, what God is inviting us to as we become aware of our falsity is God is inviting us to a new depth of relationship. So it's really an invitation from God to grow in our relationship. Now that changes the whole dynamic, doesn't it? What this is all about. And so with that in mind, we can begin to look at what we need to look at. And in the next slide, we have the, how does God work with us? And I kind of hinted at this already with the awareness and the mercy, but God's infinite mercy and our need of healing, those are really the two poles that God works with. God's strength and our weakness. Now, isn't that a great combination? God's strength and our weakness. Usually we try to separate the two, or we think that God doesn't, we're not ready for God if we're weak. No, that's not what the scripture says. I remember Paul when he said, take this thorn out of my side. And Jesus said, my strength is sufficient for you. And in fact, it's in your weakness that healing is going to take place. And so God gradually frees us as we begin to face and be with our own weakness. Back in the year 2000, which has already been 10 years now, as some of you know, I was very close to death. I was suffering from cancer, and I had an experience of this that I want to share with you because I think it's a universal, even though it was my own personal experience, I think it touches on the universal struggle of all of us. And one evening, in the middle of the night, I couldn't breathe. I was on oxygen. The doctor had put me on hospice. It gave me 2 weeks to live. And I really couldn't get my breath because my lungs were filling up with fluid. And so I sat up in bed. I remember sitting up in bed, and then I had this experience, and it was like a waking dream, if you've ever had a waking dream. I have no idea how long it lasted, but my whole life flashed in front of me. All the events and all the situations and all the relationships and whatever, it all went in front of me. And many times when people are dying, they say they have that experience. And I was standing there just observing all of these events and these situations. And it was though there was a kind, merciful presence. I had a real sense that Jesus was with me standing there, or God, the Father, whoever. But the divine was there. And as I looked at each event, I was the critical judge. And so I informed God of what I did wrong and what I should have done and the mistakes I made. I was merciful. I was not merciful. And as I did that, it was almost like God nudged me and kind of said, that's true, Maria. You have made mistakes. But you learn from those mistakes. And it's kind of like I wanted to stay with it and kind of show some more mistakes. But God would kind of nudge me on to the next event. And then it's like, again, I was the critical judge. And I pointed out to God everything I had done wrong, my shortcomings, my impatience, whatever it may be, my judgments, my pride. And God said, that's true, Maria. You have made mistakes. But you learn by those mistakes. That went through every event, all the significant events of my life. And at the end of the experience, this tremendous sense of gratitude welled up within me. Gratitude that God was so patient with me. And that God was not vindictive and said, you know, why did you do this? Why didn't you know better? God simply said, yes, you made mistakes. He didn't pretend like I hadn't. You made mistakes, but you learned from those mistakes. And all I could experience was God's loving, forgiving, merciful presence. And I was so deeply grateful.